The navy blue sweater hung between them like a bridge. Neither was ready to cross. And Mark Reyes could feel his world tilting on its axis as Nathan Price stood in his doorway wearing it like he belonged there. Like he belonged to Mark in ways that made his chest tight with longing. Nathan's fingers played with the hem of the borrowed sweater, the soft wool that still smelled faintly of Mark's cologne. And when he looked up with those impossibly green eyes, Mark felt something crack open inside his rib cage. The sweater had been meant as a simple loan, a casual gesture between friends when Nathan mentioned being cold during their study session last week. But here Nathan stood, 7 days later, wearing it like armor, like a declaration, like he never intended to give it back. Mark's breath caught as Nathan stepped closer, close enough that Mark could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, close enough to notice how the sweater fit him perfectly, how it made his skin look warm and golden in the afternoon light streaming through the apartment windows. The electricity between them crackled like a live wire, dangerous and impossible to ignore. Nathan's voice came out softer than a whisper when he finally spoke. "Mark, I need to tell you something about this sweater, about why I keep wearing it, about why I can't seem to take it off. But to understand how they arrived at this moment, how a simple borrowed sweater became the catalyst that would change everything between them, we need to go back to where it all began." 3 weeks earlier, Mark had been living in that familiar state of quiet suffering that comes with loving someone who doesn't know they're loved. He had perfected the art of being Nathan's best friend, the reliable one, the one who listened to complaints about failed dates and offered advice about relationships that never seemed to work out. Mark had become a ghost in his own life, watching from the sidelines as Nathan stumbled through a series of meaningless connections, never understanding why none of them felt right. The ache had settled into Mark's bones over the past 2 years and 4 months, a constant companion that he carried like a secret weight. Every shared laugh, every casual touch, every moment of easy intimacy between them only served to remind Mark of what he couldn't have, what he was too terrified to ask for. Before we see how this ends, tell us where y'all are watching from and hype this video into the comments. Mark had been grading papers in his small apartment when Nathan knocked that first evening, looking frustrated and disheveled after another disappointing date. Nathan had slumped onto Mark's couch with the dramatic flair that Mark found both endearing and heartbreaking, running his hands through his dark hair in a gesture that made Mark's stomach flip. "Another disaster," Nathan had announced, his voice carrying that particular note of confusion that had become increasingly common over the past few months. "I don't understand what's wrong with me, Mark. She was perfect on paper, beautiful, smart, funny, everything I should want. But sitting across from her at dinner, I felt like I was playing a role in someone else's life." Mark had set aside his papers, giving Nathan his full attention, despite the familiar twist of pain in his chest. "What do you mean?" Nathan had shifted on the couch, his shoulder brushing against Mark's as he turned to face him. "It's like there's something missing. Some connection that should be there but isn't. I keep thinking about what real love is supposed to feel like, and I wonder if I'm broken somehow. If I'm incapable of feeling that kind of deep connection with someone." The irony had been almost unbearable. Here was Nathan, the person Mark loved more than breathing, wondering if he was capable of love while sitting close enough that Mark could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Mark had wanted to laugh and cry simultaneously, to shake Nathan and tell him that love was right here, had been right here all along. Instead, Mark had done what he always did. He had been the supportive friend, the voice of reason, the one who offered comfort without revealing the depth of his own feelings. "Maybe you're just looking in the wrong places," Mark had suggested gently. "Maybe the right person isn't who you think it should be." Nathan had studied Mark's face with an intensity that made Mark's pulse race. "You always know exactly what to say," he had murmured. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The words had been meant as gratitude, as friendship, but they had hit Mark like a physical blow. The casual way Nathan said them, the easy assumption that Mark would always be there, always be available, always be content with this half-life of loving from the shadows. That night, as autumn settled over the city with its crisp promise of change, Nathan had shivered slightly in his thin jacket. Mark had noticed immediately, the way he always noticed everything about Nathan, and without thinking, he had offered his navy blue sweater. "Here," Mark had said, pulling the soft wool over his head and handing it to Nathan. "You're freezing." Nathan had hesitated for just a moment, his fingers brushing Mark's as he accepted the sweater. The contact had sent electricity shooting up Mark's arm, a sensation so intense it was almost painful. "Thanks," Nathan had said, pulling the sweater on over his button-down shirt. "It smells like you." The comment had been casual, observational, but it had made Mark's heart race in a way that felt dangerous. Nathan had settled back onto the couch wearing Mark's sweater, and something about seeing him in Mark's clothes had shifted the atmosphere in the room. Mark had found himself staring at the way the navy blue brought out the color in Nathan's eyes, the way the sweater seemed to fit him perfectly, like it had been made for him. They had talked late into the night, their conversation meandering through topics both deep and mundane. Nathan had curled up against the arm of the couch, Mark's sweater wrapped around him like a cocoon, and Mark had memorized every detail of the moment. The way Nathan's hair fell across his forehead, the soft sound of his breathing, the unconscious way he had pulled the sweater closer to his face when he thought Mark wasn't looking. When Nathan had finally left that night, he had paused at the door, his hand on the handle. The sweater he had started, then stopped. "I'll get it back to you soon." Mark had nodded, not trusting his voice, and watched Nathan disappear into the night, wearing his sweater like a promise neither of them understood yet. But Nathan didn't return the sweater the next day, or the day after that. Mark began to notice it everywhere, catching glimpses of navy blue in the hallways at the university where they both taught, seeing Nathan wear it to faculty meetings and casual dinners with friends. Each sighting sent a jolt through Mark's system, a mix of possession and longing that he didn't know how to process. The sweater became a constant presence in their interactions, a visual reminder of that night on the couch, of the moment when something had shifted between them. Mark found himself watching for it, his eyes automatically searching for that familiar shade of blue whenever Nathan entered a room. It was like Nathan was carrying a piece of Mark with him everywhere he went, and the thought was both thrilling and torturous. A week passed, then another. Mark considered asking for the sweater back, but every time he opened his mouth to mention it, something held him back. There was something about the way Nathan wore it, the unconscious way he would touch the fabric during conversations, that suggested it meant more to him than a simple borrowed item. Mark began to wonder if Nathan was holding on to it for the same reason Mark couldn't bring himself to ask for it back, because letting go felt like losing something precious and undefined. The change in Nathan became more noticeable as the days went on. He seemed more thoughtful, more introspective, often lost in contemplation during their usual coffee meetings and shared lunches. Mark caught him staring into space with an expression of confusion and something that looked almost like longing. When Mark asked if everything was okay, Nathan would shake his head and offer a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Nathan had said during one of their coffee dates, his fingers absently tracing the cable knit pattern on the sweater's sleeve. "About what you said that night, about looking in the wrong places." Mark's heart had stuttered. "What about it?" Nathan had been quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond Mark's shoulder. "I keep wondering if I've been approaching relationships all wrong. If I've been trying to fit myself into some predetermined idea of what I should want, instead of paying attention to what actually makes me feel alive." The words had hung between them, loaded with implications that Mark didn't dare examine too closely. "What makes you feel alive?" he had asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nathan's eyes had met his then, and Mark had seen something vulnerable and uncertain flickering in their depths. "I'm still figuring that out," Nathan had admitted, "but I think it might not be what I expected." These conversations became more frequent, more charged with unspoken meaning. Nathan would show up at Mark's apartment wearing the sweater, and they would talk late into the night about love and connection and the difference between what society expected and what the heart actually wanted. Mark found himself walking a tightrope between hope and fear, reading into every word, every glance, every casual touch. The physical contact between them began to escalate in subtle ways. Nathan would sit closer on the couch, their thighs touching as they watched movies or graded papers together. He would reach for Mark's hand during particularly emotional conversations, their fingers intertwining with an ease that felt both natural and revolutionary. Mark would catch Nathan looking at him with an intensity that made his breath catch, as if Nathan was seeing him for the first time. One evening, as they sat on Mark's balcony sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sun set over the city, Nathan had turned to him with a question that made Mark's world tilt. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to kiss someone you weren't supposed to kiss? Nathan had asked, his voice soft and contemplative. Mark's wine glass had frozen halfway to his lips. What do you mean? Nathan had been wearing the navy sweater, as he always was these days, and the setting sun had turned his hair to burnished gold. I mean someone who doesn't fit the expected narrative. Someone who would change everything if you let them. The question had hung between them like a challenge, like an invitation, like a door that once opened could never be closed. Mark had felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he searched Nathan's face for clues about what he was really asking. I think, Mark had said carefully, that sometimes the most frightening dares lead to the most beautiful discoveries. Nathan had smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. But even as the tension between them ratcheted higher, even as the air grew thick with possibility, neither of them had been brave enough to cross that final line. They continued their dance of almost confessions and meaningful looks, of touches that lingered just a moment too long, and conversations that skirted the edge of everything they weren't saying. Mark had begun to feel like he was living in a state of constant anticipation, every nerve ending alive and waiting for the moment when the careful balance between them would finally tip. The sweater had become a symbol of that anticipation, a navy blue reminder of the night when everything had started to change. Nathan continued to wear it everywhere, and Mark began to understand that it wasn't forgetfulness or carelessness that kept Nathan from returning it. It was something deeper, something that neither of them was quite ready to name. The sweater had become a connection between them, a tangible link that allowed Nathan to carry a piece of Mark with him wherever he went. Mark found himself lying awake at night, imagining what it would feel like to have Nathan choose him, to have all that warmth and intensity focused on him with intention and purpose. He pictured Nathan wearing the sweater, not as a borrowed item, but as something that belonged to him, something that represented the bond between them. The fantasy was both beautiful and terrifying because Mark knew that once they crossed that line, there would be no going back. Their friendship, solid and reliable and precious, would be forever changed. Either it would transform into something even more beautiful, or it would shatter under the weight of unreciprocated feelings and awkward aftermath. As the third week approached, Mark noticed that Nathan seemed to be building up to something. There was a restless energy about him, a sense of someone standing on the edge of a cliff and gathering the courage to jump. He would start conversations that seemed to be leading somewhere significant, then pull back at the last moment, leaving them both frustrated and aching with unfinished business. Mark began to wonder if he should be the one to break the stalemate, to finally voice the feelings that had been growing stronger every day. But every time he worked up the courage, fear would grip him, and he would retreat back into the safety of friendship, unwilling to risk losing Nathan entirely. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when Nathan showed up at Mark's door looking disheveled and emotional. Still wearing the navy sweater, but with an expression of such vulnerability that Mark's heart clenched in response. Nathan had been on another date and another attempt to force himself into a relationship that felt wrong, and Mark could see the exhaustion and confusion written across his features. I can't do this anymore, Nathan had said without preamble, pushing past Mark into the apartment. I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. Can't keep trying to make myself feel things that aren't there. Mark had closed the door and turned to find Nathan pacing the length of his living room, running his hands through his hair in agitation. The sweater was wrinkled from the evening's activities, but Nathan wore it like armor, like the only thing keeping him grounded. What happened? Mark had asked gently. Nathan had stopped pacing and turned to face him, his eyes bright with unshed tears. She kissed me tonight, Sarah. And I felt nothing, worse than nothing. I felt like I was betraying someone, like I was being unfaithful to something more important. The words had hit Mark like a physical blow, hope and fear warring in his chest. Who were you being unfaithful to? Nathan had stared at him for a long moment, something desperate and pleading in his expression. I think you know, he had whispered. The admission had hung between them like a live wire, dangerous and electric and impossible to ignore. Mark had felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble, the defenses he had built to protect his heart proving inadequate, against the raw honesty in Nathan's voice. "Nathan," Mark had started, but Nathan had held up a hand to stop him. "Let me say this," Nathan had pleaded. "I need to say this before I lose my nerve. I've been wearing your sweater for 3 weeks, and I know you've noticed. I know you've been too polite to ask for it back, but the truth is I can't give it back. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Mark's breath had caught in his throat. "Why?" "Because it smells like you," Nathan had said, his voice breaking slightly. "Because when I wear it, I feel like I'm carrying a piece of you with me. Because for the first time in my life, something feels right, and I'm terrified of losing that feeling." The confession had shattered the last of Mark's resistance. "Nathan," he had breathed, taking a step closer. "I think I'm falling in love with you," Nathan had continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I think I've been falling in love with you for months, maybe years, and I was too scared to admit it. Too scared to risk what we have. But I can't pretend it anymore that these feelings aren't real." Mark had felt tears prick at his eyes, overwhelmed by the beauty and impossibility of the moment. "You're falling in love with me?" Nathan had nodded, taking a tentative step closer. "I know it's complicated. I know it changes everything. But I can't keep lying to myself about what I want, about who I want." The space between them had seemed to shimmer with possibility, charged with 3 weeks of building tension and 2 years of unspoken longing. Mark had felt like he was standing at the edge of a precipice, about to leap into something that would transform his entire world. "I've been in love with you for 2 years and 4 months, Mark had whispered, the words feeling both foreign and inevitable on his tongue. "Since the night you fell asleep on my couch during that terrible movie marathon, and I realized I would rather watch you sleep than do anything else in the world." Nathan's eyes had widened, wonder and relief flooding his features. 2 years? 2 years and 4 months, Mark had confirmed. "I've been counting." Nathan had laughed then, a sound of pure joy that filled the apartment and made Mark's heart soar. "All this time I thought I was going crazy. I thought these feelings were one-sided. They had moved toward each other as if drawn by gravity, the space between them disappearing until they were close enough to touch." Mark had reached up to cup Nathan's face, his thumb brushing across the sharp line of his cheekbone, and Nathan had leaned into the contact like a man starved for affection. "Can I kiss you?" Nathan had whispered, his breath warm against Mark's skin. Mark had nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging his throat, and Nathan had leaned in to press their lips together in a kiss that was soft and tentative and perfect. It had lasted only a moment, a gentle brush of contact that sent electricity shooting through Mark's entire body. When they had pulled apart, both breathing heavily, Nathan had rested his forehead against Mark's. "That felt," Nathan had started, then stopped, searching for words. "Right," Mark had finished. "It felt right." Nathan had smiled, that brilliant smile that transformed his entire face. "More than right. It felt like coming home." They had kissed again then, deeper and more certain, 3 weeks of tension and 2 years of longing pouring into the contact. Mark had felt like his heart might burst from the joy of it, the impossible reality of Nathan in his arms, Nathan kissing him back with equal fervor. When they had finally broken apart, both trembling with emotion and possibility, Nathan had pulled back just enough to look into Mark's eyes. "I'm scared," he had admitted. "I'm terrified of messing this up." Mark had smoothed his hands over Nathan's shoulders, feeling the soft wool of his own sweater beneath his palms. "Me too," he had said, "but I think some things are worth being scared for." Nathan had nodded, his eyes bright with tears and hope. "So what do we do now?" Mark had considered the question, thinking about all the ways their lives would change, all the challenges they would face, all the beautiful possibilities that lay ahead of them. "We figure it out together," he had said simply, "one day at a time." They had spent the rest of the evening talking, really talking, about their feelings and their fears and their hopes for what they might build together. Nathan had curled up against Mark's side on the couch, still wearing the navy sweater, and Mark had marveled at how perfectly Nathan fit against him, how right it felt to hold him close. As the night grew late, Nathan had looked up at Mark with sleepy contentment. "I should probably go home," he had murmured, though he made no move to leave. "You could stay," Mark had offered, his heart racing at his own boldness. "If you want to." Nathan had smiled, pressing a soft kiss to Mark's jaw. I want to, he had whispered. I want to stay. They had moved to Mark's bedroom with a tenderness that spoke of new love and infinite possibility. Nathan had kept the sweater on as they lay together in the dark, talking in whispers about everything and nothing, their fingers intertwined and their hearts beating in synchrony. Mark had fallen asleep with Nathan in his arms, still hardly believing that this was real, that Nathan had chosen him, that they had finally found the courage to reach for what they both wanted. The sweater had become a symbol of their journey, a navy blue reminder of the night when everything had changed. When Mark had woken the next morning to find Nathan still there, still wearing his sweater, still smiling at him with love and wonder, he had known that they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. They were no longer just friends dancing around unspoken feelings. They were something new, something precious, something worth fighting for. The weeks that followed had been a revelation. They had navigated the transition from friendship to romance with a grace that surprised them both, their existing foundation of trust and affection providing a solid base for their new relationship. Nathan had officially moved some of his clothes into Mark's closet, though he continued to wear the navy sweater with a frequency that made Mark's heart flutter every time he saw it. They had told their friends and colleagues about their relationship, weathering the surprise and adjustment with patience and humor. Some people had been shocked. Others had claimed they had seen it coming all along. Mark had found that he didn't care about anyone else's opinions as long as Nathan was happy, as long as they were building something real and lasting together. Nathan had broken things off with Sarah gently but firmly, explaining that he had realized he was looking for something different than what she could offer. She had been hurt but ultimately understanding, and Mark had been grateful for her grace in a situation that could have been much more difficult. The sweater had become a running joke between them, a symbol of the obliviousness that had kept them apart for so long and the love that had finally brought them together. Nathan would wear it when he was feeling particularly affectionate, when he wanted to remind Mark of that first night when everything had changed. 3 months after that pivotal evening, Mark had woken to find Nathan making coffee in their kitchen, wearing the navy sweater over his pajama pants and humming softly to himself. The sight had filled Mark with such profound contentment that he had stood in the doorway for several minutes, just watching the man he loved move through their shared space with easy familiarity. Nathan had turned and caught him staring, a smile spreading across his features. "Good morning," he had said, crossing to press a soft kiss to Mark's lips. "Sleep well?" Mark had wrapped his arms around Nathan's waist, pulling him close and breathing in the scent of coffee and warmth and home. "Better than I ever have in my life," he had replied honestly. Nathan had laughed, the sound bright and joyful in the morning light. "Even better than that first night when I fell asleep on your couch?" Mark had considered the question seriously. That night was the beginning of everything, he had said. But this, he had gestured around their kitchen, at Nathan in his arms wearing his sweater. This is everything. They had stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the gentle light of early morning, both marveling at the journey that had brought them to this place. The sweater that had started it all hung between them, soft and familiar and perfect, a tangible reminder of the love they had built from friendship and courage and the willingness to take a leap of faith. Nathan had pulled back to look into Mark's eyes, his expression serious and tender. "I love you," he had said, the words carrying the weight of promise and commitment. "I love you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. I love you for being patient with me while I figured it out. I love you for letting me keep your sweater even though we both knew I was never going to give it back." Mark had felt tear prick at his eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion in Nathan's voice. "I love you too," he had whispered. "I love you for choosing me. I love you for being brave enough to change everything. I love you for making my favorite sweater look better on you than it ever did on me." Nathan had grinned at that, the expression transforming his entire face. "Does that mean I can keep it officially?" Mark had pretended to consider the question seriously. "Well," he had said, "I suppose I could be convinced to let you have permanent custody, under certain conditions." Nathan had raised an eyebrow, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "What kind of conditions?" Mark had leaned in to whisper in Nathan's ear, his voice low and full of promise. "The kind that involve you wearing it for me whenever I ask, and letting me take it off you whenever I want." Nathan had shivered at the words. his arms tightening around Mark's waist. "I think those terms are acceptable," he had murmured back. They had sealed the agreement with a kiss that tasted of coffee and morning light and infinite possibility. The navy sweater soft between them like a blessing, like a promise, like the beginning of everything they would build together. Now, months later, as Mark stood in his doorway watching Nathan approach wearing that same sweater with an expression of love and determination, he marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. The sweater that had started as a simple loan had become so much more, a symbol of the love they had found in each other and the courage it had taken to claim it. Nathan stepped closer, close enough that Mark could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, close enough to notice how the sweater still fit him perfectly, how it still made his skin look warm and golden in the afternoon light. The electricity between them crackled like a live wire, familiar now, but no less intense for its familiarity. "I have something for you," Nathan said, his voice soft with emotion. He reached into the pocket of the sweater and pulled out a small velvet box that made Mark's heart stop entirely. Mark's breath caught in his throat as Nathan dropped to one knee right there in the doorway, still wearing the navy sweater that had changed everything between them. The box trembled slightly in Nathan's hands, betraying his nervousness despite the certainty in his eyes. "Mark Reyes," Nathan said, his voice steady and sure despite the tears beginning to gather in his eyes. "2 years ago, you lent me this sweater, and I never gave it back because somewhere deep down, I knew it meant more than just borrowed clothes. It meant belonging to someone who saw me before I saw myself. It meant being loved by someone who was patient enough to wait while I figured out who I was and what I wanted." Mark felt his own tears beginning to fall as Nathan opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring that caught the light and threw it back in brilliant sparkles. "I want to spend the rest of my life wearing your sweaters and sharing your coffee and falling asleep in your arms," Nathan continued. "I want to build a life with you that's as comfortable and warm and perfect as this sweater that brought us together. Mark, will you marry me?" The question hung in the air between them, beautiful and terrifying and absolutely right. Mark looked down at Nathan, at this man who had transformed his entire world, who had taught him that love was worth the risk, that some leaps of faith led to the most incredible landings. "Yes," Mark whispered, then louder, his voice breaking with joy. "Yes, of course. Yes." Nathan surged to his feet, sliding the ring onto Mark's finger with shaking hands, before pulling him into a kiss that tasted of tears and laughter and promises kept. The navy sweater was soft between them, a familiar comfort that had witnessed every stage of their love story. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying simultaneously, Nathan rested his forehead against Mark's. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you for letting me keep your sweater. I love you for letting me keep your heart." Mark cupped Nathan's face in his hands, his thumb brushing away the tears on his cheek. "I love you for making my sweater look better on you than it ever did on me," he said, echoing the words from that morning months ago. "I love you for being brave enough to ask for what you wanted, even when you didn't know what that was." They stood there in the doorway, holding each other and marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. The sweater that had started as a simple gesture of care had become the foundation of something beautiful and lasting, a love story written in navy blue wool and whispered confessions and the courage to reach for happiness. As the afternoon light shifted around them, painting their apartment in golden hues, Mark thought about all the moments that had led them here. The first night when Nathan had borrowed the sweater, the weeks of watching him wear it like armor, the evening when they had finally found the courage to speak their truth, and now this moment, this perfect culmination of everything they had built together. The sweater would always be special to them, Mark realized. It would hang in their shared closet as a reminder of how love could grow from the simplest gestures, how patience and courage could transform friendship into something transcendent. Their children, if they were blessed with them, would hear the story of the navy sweater that brought their fathers together, would understand that sometimes the most beautiful love stories began with the smallest acts of kindness. Nathan pulled back to look into Mark's eyes, his expression soft with wonder and contentment. "So," he said with a grin, "I guess this means I really do get to keep the sweater permanently now." Mark laughed, the sound bright and joyful in the golden afternoon. I think permanent custody has been officially granted, he agreed, though I reserve the right to borrow it back occasionally. Nathan's grin widened. I think those terms are acceptable, he said, echoing their conversation from months ago. As long as you promise to always let me wear it when I'm feeling sentimental about the night that changed everything. Mark leaned in to press a soft kiss to Nathan's lips, tasting the promise of their future in the contact. Deal, he whispered against Nathan's mouth. Though I have a feeling you're going to be feeling sentimental about that night for the rest of our lives. Nathan laughed, pulling Mark closer until there was no space left between them. I'm counting on it, he murmured back. They moved inside their apartment together, hands intertwined, the ring on Mark's finger catching the light as they settled onto the couch where so much of their story had unfolded. Nathan curled up against Mark's side, still wearing the navy sweater, and Mark marveled at how perfectly they fit together, how right this felt, how grateful he was for that first night when Nathan had been cold and Mark had offered warmth without knowing he was offering his heart as well. The sweater would fade with time and washing, would develop small holes and loose threads that would need mending. But the love it represented would only grow stronger, deepening with each shared morning and whispered confession and moment of perfect understanding. It would weather every storm and celebrate every joy. The constant reminder that sometimes the most profound connections began with the simplest gestures of care. As the sun set over the city, painting their apartment in shades of gold and rose, Mark pressed a kiss to the top of Nathan's head and smiled at the beautiful predictability of their future. There would be more sweaters, more shared clothes, more moments of casual intimacy that would deepen their bond. There would be a wedding where Nathan would probably wear something blue in honor of the sweater that started it all. There would be years of mornings where one of them would reach for that navy sweater on cold days, wrapping themselves in wool and memories in the enduring warmth of being loved completely. Nathan tilted his head to look up at Mark, his eyes bright with happiness and mischief. What are you thinking about? He asked softly. Mark considered the question, thinking about all the ways their life would unfold, all the beautiful, ordinary moments that lay ahead of them. I'm thinking about how a simple sweater changed everything, he said finally. I'm thinking about how grateful I am that you were cold that night and that I had something warm to offer you. Nathan smiled, that brilliant expression that never failed to make Mark's heart skip. I'm thinking about how you offered me so much more than just a sweater that night, he said. You offered me a glimpse of what love could feel like, even if neither of us understood it at the time. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last of the daylight fade beyond their windows. The apartment around them told the story of their relationship in small details. Nathan's books mixed with Mark's on the shelves, their coffee mugs side by side in the kitchen, the navy sweater draped over the back of a chair where Nathan had left it the night before. Everything in their shared space spoke of a love that had grown organically from friendship and trust, a relationship built on the solid foundation of truly knowing and accepting each other. The sweater was just one piece of that story, but it was the piece that had catalyzed everything else. The moment when the careful balance between them had finally tipped towards something beautiful and lasting. As the evening deepened around them, Nathan shifted in Mark's arms, turning to face him fully. I have a confession to make, he said, his voice playful but tinged with genuine emotion. Mark raised an eyebrow, curious. What kind of confession? Nathan's fingers played with the hem of the sweater, the same unconscious gesture that had driven Mark to distraction during those first weeks. I knew, he said quietly, maybe not consciously, but some part of me knew that keeping your sweater meant something. I knew I was holding on to more than just borrowed clothes. Mark felt his heart clench with tenderness. What did you know? Nathan was quiet for a moment, searching for the right words. I knew that giving it back would mean losing something precious, he said finally. I knew that as long as I had it, I had a reason to see you, a connection that couldn't be easily severed. I think I was buying myself time to figure out what I was really feeling, what I really wanted. The admission hung between them, beautiful in its honesty. Mark reached up to cup Nathan's face, his thumb tracing the line of his cheekbone. And what did you figure out? Nathan leaned into the touch, his eyes fluttering closed for a moment. I figured out that I'd been looking for you my whole life without knowing it, he whispered. I figured out that all those failed relationships weren't failures at all. They were just stepping stones leading me to this moment. To you. Mark felt tears prick at his eyes again, overwhelmed by the depth of love and gratitude filling his chest. You were worth the wait, he said softly. You were worth every moment of uncertainty and longing and fear. You were worth everything. Nathan opened his eyes and Mark saw his own emotions reflected back at him. Love and wonder, and the deep contentment that came from finding your person, your home, your heart's true desire. I love you, Nathan said simply. I love you for letting me keep your sweater. I love you for letting me keep your heart. I love you for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Mark leaned in to kiss him and pouring all of his love and gratitude and joy into the contact. The sweater was soft between them, a familiar comfort that had witnessed every stage of their love story, from tentative friendship to passionate romance, to this moment of perfect understanding and commitment. When they broke apart, both breathing heavily, Mark rested his forehead against Nathan's. Then we're both exactly where we need to be, he whispered. Nathan smiled, that radiant expression that had captured Mark's heart from the very beginning. Exactly where we need to be, he agreed. As the night settled around them, they made plans for their future, talking about wedding details and honeymoon destinations and the life they would build together. The navy sweater remained a constant presence, draped over Nathan's shoulders like a blessing, like a reminder of how far they had come and how much they had to look forward to. They talked about the apartment they would share officially now, about combining their belongings and creating a space that truly belonged to both of them. They discussed the possibility of children, of little ones who would grow up surrounded by love and acceptance, who would learn from their father's example that love came in many forms and that the heart wanted what it wanted, regardless of society's expectations. Nathan mentioned wanting to frame the sweater someday, to preserve it as a memento of their love story. Mark had laughed at the suggestion, but he understood the sentiment. The sweater represented something precious and irreplaceable, a tangible reminder of the moment when their lives had changed forever. As they prepared for bed that night, Nathan carefully folded the sweater and placed it on the dresser, treating it with the reverence it deserved. Mark watched him, marveling at the tenderness in the gesture, the way Nathan handled the wool like it was made of spun gold rather than simple fiber. In bed, they curled up together with the easy familiarity of long-term lovers, Nathan's head on Mark's chest, their legs intertwined beneath the covers. The ring on Mark's finger caught the moonlight streaming through their window, a glittering reminder of the promises they had made and the future they would build together. Mark, Nathan whispered into the darkness. Hmm? Mark responded, already half asleep, lulled by the warmth of Nathan's body against his and the steady rhythm of his breathing. Thank you, Nathan said softly, for the sweater, for everything. Mark pressed a kiss to the top of Nathan's head, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. Thank you for keeping it, he whispered back. Thank you for keeping me. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the quiet contentment that came from being exactly where they belonged. The navy sweater sat folded on their dresser, a silent witness to the love they had built and the promises they had made. A reminder that sometimes the most beautiful love stories began with the simplest acts of kindness and grew into something extraordinary through patience, courage, and the willingness to reach for happiness. In the months that followed their engagement, the sweater continued to play a role in their daily life, a comfortable constant that bridged their past and future. Nathan would wear it on lazy Sunday mornings when they read the paper together over coffee, on chilly evenings when they took walks through their neighborhood, on days when he was feeling particularly sentimental about their love story. Mark found that he loved seeing Nathan in the sweater as much now as he had during those first confusing weeks when everything was unspoken and uncertain. But now the sight filled him with contentment rather than longing, satisfaction rather than yearning. The sweater represented security now, the knowledge that Nathan had chosen him and would continue choosing him every day for the rest of their lives. Their friends had embraced their relationship with warmth and enthusiasm, many admitting that they had suspected there was something special between Mark and Nathan long before either of them had figured it out themselves. The sweater became part of the mythology of their relationship, mentioned in toasts at dinner parties and referenced in the speeches at their engagement party. Helen Mendoza, Nathan's colleague and close friend, had pulled Mark aside at their engagement celebration to share her perspective on their love story. "I always wondered about that sweater," she had said with a knowing smile. "Nathan wore it constantly for weeks, and every time someone complimented him on it, he would get this dreamy look in his eyes and mention that it belonged to a friend. I think I knew before he did that the friend in question was someone very special." Mark had laughed at the observation, charmed by the idea that their love story had been obvious to everyone except themselves. "It's funny how clear things become in retrospect," he had replied. "All those signs we missed, all those moments when we were dancing around the truth." Helen had nodded sagely. "Sometimes we need time to grow into our own happiness," she had said. "Sometimes we need to try on different versions of ourselves before we find the one that fits perfectly." The wedding planning process had been a joy rather than a stress, largely because Mark and Nathan approached it as a team, making decisions together with the easy communication that had always characterized their friendship. They chose a venue that felt intimate and personal, a small garden where they could exchange vows surrounded by the people who mattered most to them. Nathan had insisted on incorporating the color navy into their wedding palette, a subtle nod to the sweater that had brought them together. Mark had been touched by the gesture, understanding that Nathan wanted their wedding to honor the entire journey of their relationship, from tentative friendship through confused longing to the deep, abiding love they shared now. As their wedding day approached, they found themselves reflecting more and more on the path that had led them to this moment. The sweater had become a symbol not just of their love, but of the patience and faith required to build something lasting and beautiful. It represented the willingness to wait for the right person, to trust in the process of growth and discovery, to believe that love would find a way to flourish even in the most unlikely circumstances. The night before their wedding, as they prepared to spend their last night in separate apartments, a tradition they had decided to honor despite living together for months, Nathan had carefully packed the navy sweater in his overnight bag. Mark had watched him fold it with the same tenderness he always showed the garment, and had felt his heart swell with love and gratitude for this man who treasured even the smallest symbols of their connection. "I'm taking it with me tonight," Nathan had explained, though Mark hadn't asked. "I want to wear it tomorrow morning while I'm getting ready. I want to have that connection to you and to our story, especially during the few hours when we'll be apart." Mark had crossed the room to wrap Nathan in his arms, holding him close and breathing in the familiar scent that meant home and safety and love. "I love that you want to wear it," he had said softly. "I love that it still means something to you after all this time." Nathan had pulled back to look into Mark's eyes, his expression tender and serious. "It will always mean something to me," he had said. "It's the reason we're here, the catalyst that changed everything. I'll probably want to wear it on every anniversary for the rest of our lives." Mark had laughed, charmed by the idea of Nathan marking their special occasions by wearing the same navy sweater year after year. "I think I can live with that tradition," he had replied, "though we might need to buy a backup in case something happens to the original." Nathan had grinned at the suggestion. Multiple navy sweaters, he had mused, a whole closet full of them. "Our children will think we're completely obsessed with that particular color." The mention of children had made Mark's heart skip, as it always did. They had talked extensively about their desire to build a family together, and Mark couldn't wait to see Nathan as a father, to watch him pass on his warmth and humor and capacity for love to the next generation. "Our children will know the story of the navy sweater," Mark had said firmly. "They'll understand that sometimes love begins with the smallest gestures of kindness, and that patience and courage can transform friendship into something extraordinary." Nathan had kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. "I can't wait to tell them," he had whispered against Mark's lips. "I can't wait to share our story with them and watch them roll their eyes at how oblivious their fathers were." They had spent their last night as unmarried men talking about their future, about the life they would build together, and the love they would share with their children and grandchildren. The sweater had sat folded nearby, a quiet witness to their dreams and plans, a reminder of how far they had come and how much they had to look forward to. The morning of their wedding dawned bright and clear, with the kind of golden sunlight that seemed to bless special occasions. Mark woke in his childhood bedroom at his parents' house, where he had spent the night according to tradition, and immediately thought of Nathan getting ready across town. He pictured Nathan pulling on the navy sweater over his pajamas, wrapping himself in wool and memories as he prepared for the most important day of their lives. The thought filled Mark with such profound happiness that he lay in bed for several extra minutes, just savoring the knowledge that in a few hours, Nathan would be his husband, that they would exchange vows and rings and promises that would bind them together for the rest of their lives. Mark's mother knocked on his door around 8 o'clock, bringing him coffee and the kind of maternal fussing that he had missed during his years of living independently. She sat on the edge of his bed while he drank his coffee, her eyes bright with tears of happiness. "I'm so proud of you," she said softly. "I'm so happy that you found someone who loves you the way Nathan does. I've never seen you as content as you've been these past months." Mark felt his own tears threaten at his mother's words. "Nathan makes me feel like the best version of myself," he replied. "He sees things in me that I didn't even know were there." His mother smiled, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "That's what real love does," she said. "It doesn't try to change you. It just helps you become more fully yourself." The words stayed with Mark as he showered and dressed, as he carefully adjusted his tie and smoothed his hair. Nathan had indeed helped him become more fully himself, had given him permission to want what he wanted and feel what he felt without apology or shame. The love they shared was transformative, not because it changed who they were, but because it allowed them to be completely authentic with each other. Meanwhile, across town, Nathan was indeed wearing the navy sweater as he moved through his morning routine. His sister Sandra Hill was helping him get ready, and she had commented on the sweater with a knowing smile. "Still wearing Mark's sweater, I see," she had said as Nathan poured himself coffee in his kitchen. Nathan had grinned, running his hands over the soft wool. "It's become a tradition," he had explained. "I wear it whenever I need to feel connected to him, whenever I want to remember how we got here." Sandra had studied her brother's face, seeing the deep contentment and joy that had settled over him since he and Mark had gotten together. "You're really happy, aren't you?" she had observed. Nathan had nodded, his expression soft with wonder. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he had admitted. "I used to think I was broken somehow, incapable of the kind of deep connection that other people seem to find so easily. But it turns out I was just looking in the wrong places, trying to force myself into relationships that weren't right for me." Sandra had reached over to hug him, her own eyes filling with tears. "I'm so glad you found each other," she had said. "I'm so glad you both had the courage to reach for what you really wanted." As Nathan had gotten dressed for the ceremony, carefully hanging up the navy sweater and putting on his wedding suit, he had felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought him to this moment. The sweater would be waiting for him when he got home from their honeymoon, a familiar comfort to slip into as he and Mark settled into married life. The wedding ceremony itself was everything they had dreamed it would be, intimate, impersonal, and filled with love. They had written their own vows, and Nathan's included a reference to the sweater that made everyone in attendance smile with understanding. "Mark," Nathan had said, his voice steady and clear despite the tears in his eyes, "2 years ago, you offered me your sweater when I was cold, and in doing so you offered me a warmth that had nothing to do with wool and everything to do with the generosity of your heart. You taught me what it means to be truly seen and loved for exactly who I am. You waited patiently while I figured out what I wanted, and you never made me feel foolish for taking so long to understand my own heart." Mark had been crying openly by the time Nathan finished his vows, overwhelmed by the beauty of the words and the depth of love in Nathan's voice. His own vows had referenced their journey from friendship to love, the patience and courage it had taken to transform their relationship into something even more beautiful than what they had started with. "Nathan," Mark had said, his voice thick with emotion, "you taught me that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. You showed me that sometimes the most profound connections grow slowly, organically, from the foundation of trust and friendship. You made me brave enough to reach for what I wanted, even when it meant risking everything I already had." When they exchanged rings, Mark had thought about the navy sweater waiting at home, about all the mornings when Nathan would wear it while they shared coffee and planned their days. The ring on Nathan's finger would be a constant reminder of their commitment, but the sweater would always be a special symbol of how their love had begun, of the moment when everything had changed. The reception had been a celebration of not just their wedding, but of the entire journey that had brought them to this point. Their friends and family had toasted their love with speeches that referenced the sweater, their patience, their courage in choosing each other. Mark's best friend Gary Hall had given a particularly moving toast about the power of small gestures to change lives, about how a simple act of kindness could grow into something extraordinary. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave for their honeymoon, Nathan had pulled Mark aside for a quiet moment together. "I can't wait to get home and put that sweater back on," he had whispered. "I can't wait to curl up with you on our couch and start our life as married men." Mark had kissed him softly, tasting champagne and happiness and the promise of their future. "I can't wait either," he had replied. "I can't wait to see you in our sweater, in our home as my husband." The honeymoon had been perfect. 2 weeks in a cozy cabin where they could focus entirely on each other and the new reality of being married. They had talked about their wedding, about how perfect the day had been, about how grateful they were for all the people who had supported their love story. But Mark had to admit that he was excited to return home, to settle back into their routine with the added joy of being newlyweds. He was looking forward to lazy mornings when Nathan would wear the navy sweater while they read the paper together, to quiet evenings when they would curl up on their couch and plan their future. When they finally returned home from their honeymoon, Nathan had immediately gone to their closet and pulled out the navy sweater, holding it up with a grin that made Mark's heart skip. "Home sweet home," Nathan had said, pulling the sweater over his head and settling into Mark's arms on their familiar couch. Mark had marveled at how right it felt, how perfectly Nathan fit against him, how the sweater still carried the power to make him feel overwhelmed with love and gratitude. "This is perfect," he had murmured into Nathan's hair. "This is exactly what I pictured when I imagined being married to you." Nathan had tilted his head to look up at him, his eyes bright with contentment. "What did you picture?" he had asked softly. Mark had considered the question, thinking about all the quiet domestic moments he had fantasized about during those long months of loving Nathan from a distance. "I pictured you wearing my sweaters and drinking my coffee and falling asleep in my arms," he had said finally. "I pictured us building a life together that was as comfortable and warm as this moment right here." Nathan had smiled, that radiant expression that never failed to take Mark's breath away. "Mission accomplished, then," he had said, snuggling closer. "Though technically, I think this sweater belongs to both of us now. Community property and all that." Mark had laughed, delighted by the idea that their marriage had officially made the sweater a shared possession. "I suppose you're right," he had agreed, "though I think you've definitely earned permanent custody at this point." They had spent their first evening home as married men talking about their honeymoon, about their wedding, about all the ways their life would unfold in the months and years to come. The sweater had been a constant presence, soft and familiar and perfect, a reminder of how far they had come and how much they had to look forward to. As the weeks turned into months, the sweater continued to be a special part of their daily routine. Nathan would wear it on cold mornings when he graded papers at their kitchen table, on lazy Sunday afternoons when they watched movies together, on evenings when they cooked dinner side by side in their small kitchen. Mark never tired of seeing Nathan in the sweater, never stopped feeling that little flutter of happiness whenever he caught sight of that familiar navy blue. It represented so much more than just clothing now. It was a symbol of their entire relationship, of the patience and courage and love that had brought them to this beautiful, ordinary life they were building together. They began talking more seriously about starting a family, about the children they wanted to raise together in their cozy apartment. Mark would picture Nathan wearing the sweater while he rocked their baby to sleep, would imagine their little ones growing up with the story of how their fathers had fallen in love over borrowed clothes and patient hearts. One evening, as they sat on their couch with Nathan wearing the sweater and Mark grading papers beside him, Nathan had looked up from his book with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if you hadn't offered me your sweater that night?" he had asked. Mark had considered the question seriously, trying to imagine a world where they had remained just friends, where Nathan had continued his series of unsatisfying relationships, while Mark loved him silently from the sidelines. "I think we would have found our way to each other eventually," he had said finally. "Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe we would have had to go through more heartbreak first. But I believe we were meant to be together." Nathan had smiled, reaching over to take Mark's hand. "I like to think so too," he had said. "But I'm grateful it happened the way it did. I'm grateful for that sweater and that night and the way you looked at me when I said I couldn't take it off." Mark had brought Nathan's hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to his knuckles. "I'm grateful for all of it," he had replied. "I'm grateful for your courage in keeping it, for your honesty in telling me why, for your bravery in choosing love, even when it meant changing everything about how you saw yourself." They had made love that night with the sweater pulled on the floor beside their bed, a navy blue reminder of their journey from friends to lovers to husbands. Afterward, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Mark had marveled at the perfect rightness of their life together, at the way Nathan fit against him like he had been made to be there. The sweater would continue to be part of their story as they grew older together, as they welcomed children into their family, as they celebrated anniversaries and weathered challenges, and built a love that would last a lifetime. It would fade with washing and develop small holes that would need mending, but it would never lose its significance as the catalyst that had changed everything between them. Years later, when they were old and gray and surrounded by children and grandchildren, they would still tell the story of the navy sweater, of the night when a simple gesture of kindness had opened the door to a love that had transformed both their lives. Their family would roll their eyes good-naturedly at the familiar tale, but they would understand the deeper truth it represented, the power of small acts of love to change the world. The sweater would eventually be retired to a place of honor in their closet, too fragile for regular wear, but too precious to discard. But the love it had sparked would continue to grow stronger with each passing year, a testament to the beauty that could bloom when two people had the courage to reach for what they truly wanted. And on special occasions, anniversaries, and quiet Sunday mornings when they were feeling particularly sentimental, Nathan would still slip on that navy sweater and curl up in Mark's arms, both of them marveling at the journey that had brought them to such perfect happiness. The wool would be soft against their skin, familiar and comforting and right. A tangible reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories began with the simplest acts of kindness. In those moments, wrapped in wool and memories and the enduring warmth of being completely loved, they would remember that first night when everything had changed, when Nathan had been cold and Mark had offered comfort without knowing he was offering his heart. They would think about all the moments that had led them to this perfect life they had built together, all the patience and courage and faith it had taken to transform friendship into something transcendent. The navy sweater had become more than just clothing, more than just a symbol of their love story. It had become a reminder that love could grow in the most unexpected ways, that patience and kindness could create miracles, that sometimes the most beautiful discoveries came from the willingness to step outside the boundaries of what we thought we wanted and embrace what our hearts truly needed. As Mark held Nathan close, feeling the soft wool of the sweater against his cheek and the steady rhythm of his husband's breathing, he knew with absolute certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. The sweater that had started as a simple loan had become the foundation of a love that would last forever. A reminder that sometimes the most profound connections began with the smallest gestures and grew into something extraordinary through the power of two hearts brave enough to choose each other. Their love story would continue to unfold in the years to come, filled with joy and challenges and the deep satisfaction that came from building a life with someone who truly saw and understood you. But it would always begin with that navy sweater, with the night when Nathan had been cold and Mark had offered warmth, with the moment when everything had changed and they had discovered that love, real love, was worth every moment of uncertainty and fear and hope that had brought them together. The sweater hung in their closet now, a quiet witness to the love they had built and the promises they had kept. A reminder that sometimes the most beautiful love stories were the ones that caught you completely off guard and changed everything you thought you knew about yourself and what you wanted from life. And in the end, that was exactly as it should be, because the best love stories were always the ones that transformed not just the people in them, but everyone who was lucky enough to witness the magic of two hearts finding their way home to each other.